I find things people think are hidden. That's the plainest way to say what I do for a living. I'm a forensic accountant for a federal oversight agency, and I spend my days pulling numbers apart until the story they were meant to hide becomes the only thing left visible. I am good at it. I have always been good at it. And for 4 years, I let my mother hand me a story I never would have accepted from a client, because the one thing they don't teach you in this profession is how to aim it at your own kitchen table. My name is Elena Ramos. I'm 37 years old, and I found out what had actually happened to my father's life insurance policy on a Tuesday evening in November, sitting on the floor of my Aunt Rosa's spare bedroom with a shoebox of birthday cards in my lap and my father's reading glasses on my face, because they were the only pair in the room and the light in there had always been terrible. The glasses are the reason I need to back up. My father, Miguel Ramos, wore reading glasses from the time I was about 12. Rectangular frames, tortoiseshell, the same pair for years because he saw no reason to replace something that still worked. He used to put them on whenever something required careful attention, a contract, a bill, a letter from the school. They were, in my memory, the physical gesture of a man deciding that something mattered enough to see it clearly. When he died 4 years ago, a heart attack, 63 years old, a Saturday morning in April, those glasses were on the kitchen counter next to his coffee cup, and my mother gave them to his sister Rosa because she thought Rosa would want something of his. I didn't ask for them at the time. I was managing the paperwork, the death certificates, the notifications, the 100 administrative tasks that death requires and that, in my family, have always been mine to handle. I want you to hold that detail, the glasses, because it's the thing I keep coming back to. He wore them when something needed to be seen clearly. 4 years later, I was wearing them when I finally saw clearly myself. Let me tell you about my family before I tell you what happened, because the shape of a family explains everything about the shape of a secret. My mother, Lucia, is 61, the kind of woman who runs a room the way a current runs a river, not loudly, but in one direction only, and everything in the water eventually goes where she's going. My brother Marcus is 33, 4 years younger than me, a man with enormous warmth and absolutely no relationship with consequences, who has spent most of his adult life starting things that I, at some point, was asked to quietly help with when they didn't finish well. A landscaping business at 24 that needed a loan co-signed. A restaurant at 29 that needed an emergency infusion from our parents' savings. A divorce at 31 that needed someone to help him sort the finances. And then there's Sophia, Marcus's daughter, who is 6 and who draws horses on every available surface and who is, without question, the best thing our family has produced in a generation, and who is the reason I made every decision I made after the Tuesday in November, and the reason some of those decisions were harder than the work itself. When my father died, I was the one who called the insurance company. I had helped him set up the policy years earlier, a $240,000 term life policy, straightforward, 20-year term, premiums paid by automatic bank draft. I called the claims line 2 weeks after his death to begin the process, and the representative told me, after a pause I did not immediately understand, that the policy had lapsed 8 months prior to his death due to non-payment. The bank draft had failed, they had sent notices to the address on file, and after the grace period the policy had terminated. I told her I would call back, and called my mother. She sighed the long, specific sigh of a woman who has been dreading a conversation. She said she knew. She said the automatic payment had been coming from an account they'd had to close after some difficulties the year before, and she hadn't noticed until it was too late, and she was so sorry, and your father would have wanted us not to dwell, and we'd always managed. I believed her. I want to be honest about that, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't naivety. I have spent 15 years professionally skeptical of exactly this kind of story, the clean explanation that arrives right when you're about to ask questions. But I was grieving. I was handling 63 other things simultaneously, and my mother was the one person in my life who had always been on the other side of that table from me, the one I had never once had reason to aim my professional attention at. There's a reason surgeons don't operate on family members. It isn't skill. It's that a different kind of knowledge gets in the way. So I let it go. I filed it in the part of my mind where I keep things that are painful and not actionable, and I moved on. My father's reading glasses went to Aunt Rosa, and 4 years later, Rosa fell and cracked a rib, and I drove down to spend a weekend helping her organize the spare bedroom so she could move some things to be more accessible, and I found myself sitting on the floor of that room going through a shoebox of birthday cards she'd kept because Rosa keeps everything, and the light was too dim to read without some help, and the only glasses in the room were my father's tortoiseshell pair sitting on the nightstand, and I put them on. In the shoebox, between a birthday card for my father's 48th birthday and one from his 52nd, was a card for my father's 62nd, the last birthday before he died. I opened it because it was his handwriting on the inside, and I hadn't seen his handwriting in 4 years, and I just wanted to look at it for a second. In the card, in his careful block printing, he had written about being glad Rosa was close by, about hoping the year ahead was easier, and at the bottom, almost like a postscript, one line, "I made sure Elena is taken care of with the policy. She's always the one carrying everything. It was time I did something for her in writing." I sat on the floor of Rosa's spare bedroom for a while after that. Then I took the glasses off, put them in my lap, and started thinking like a forensic accountant instead of like a daughter. I spend my days looking for the place where a number doesn't land where it was supposed to. There is always a trail, and the trail always begins with a claim number. Insurance companies are required to file claims data with state regulators, and that data is public record. I know this the way a cardiologist knows where to put the stethoscope. I didn't need my mother's account. I didn't need the policy documents. I needed a database and the name of a deceased policyholder, and I do that kind of search before lunch on an ordinary Tuesday. The claim had been filed 14 weeks after my father's death. The policy had not lapsed. The $240,000 had been paid in full to the named beneficiary on file, which I had assumed was me, because my father and I had sat together at his kitchen table 6 years earlier and discussed exactly that. The beneficiary on the paid claim was my mother. I want to give you the complete picture before I go further, because the numbers matter and I need you holding them. $240,000 paid out in the fall of the year my father died. My brother's restaurant, which had been struggling since the spring, closed that December with approximately $180,000 in creditor debt that was quietly resolved that same winter. My mother had a home equity line of credit for $90,000 at the beginning of that year. By the following spring, it was paid off. I built the timeline in 2 evenings, the way I build every timeline, no adjectives, just dates and figures and the sources that confirm them. When I was finished, it was 3 pages long, and it read exactly like what it was. Rosa was in the kitchen when I came out of the spare room. She looked at my face and set down her tea. "You found the card," she said. It wasn't a question. I asked her what she knew. She told me she'd suspected for years that my father had told her about the policy and that he had wanted me to have it, and that after the funeral, when I'd mentioned it had lapsed, something had felt wrong to her, but she had nothing concrete, and she had told herself she was an old woman imagining things. Then she went to her bedroom and came back with an envelope. It was sealed, addressed to me in my father's handwriting, slightly creased at the corners from however long it had been sitting in her dresser drawer. She said my father had given it to her 2 months before he died, during what turned out to be his last visit. He'd handed it to her at the door on his way out and said, "If anything happens, make sure Elena gets this." Not through Lucia. Directly to Elena. And then he'd gotten in his car and driven home and died 2 months later on a Saturday morning, and Rosa, who had been overwhelmed with grief and with her own health difficulties, had put the envelope in her drawer meaning to give it to me, and then had kept not finding the moment, and the years had gone by the way years do when something is in a drawer. She held the envelope out to me, and I sat down at her kitchen table, wearing my father's reading glasses, and I opened a letter from a man who had been dead for 4 years. I'm not going to read you the letter word for word, because it belongs to me and to him, and to the 4 years I spent not having it. But I'll tell you what it meant, because it's the center of this whole story. My father knew he had a heart condition. He'd been told the previous year that his risk was elevated and that he should put things in order, and being the kind of man who took things seriously when they required it, he had put things in order. He had verified the policy was current. He had updated the beneficiary designation to my name specifically. He had written a letter to his sister asking her to make sure I received it. And in the letter itself, he said one thing I have read many times since that afternoon and will never stop reading. He said he knew that I had spent my entire adult life making sure everyone else was taken care of, and that it had become so natural that nobody, including me, seemed to notice that nobody was doing the same for me. He said the policy wasn't a sum of money. It was him finally doing for me what I had always done for everyone else, without being asked and without making a production of it. He said, "You've always been able to see the thing everyone else misses. I hope this time you don't have to look too hard." He had no idea how long it would take me to look. I didn't call my mother that night. I am a forensic accountant, and I have learned from years of investigation that the worst thing you can do with evidence is show it before you know what you're going to do with it. Instead, I called my colleague James, who has known me for 9 years and has the particular kind of bluntness that comes from working in a field where imprecision has consequences. I told him the whole thing over the phone. He listened without interrupting, which for James means something is serious. Then he said, "Elena, you are the most thorough financial investigator I know, and you let your mother hand you a story you would have taken apart in 20 minutes if a client told it to you." I said, "I know." He said, "So what are you going to do with the fact that she knew you well enough to know you wouldn't look?" I didn't answer right away, but that sentence is the one that got me through everything that came after. I spent a week preparing before I said anything to anyone in my family. I pulled every document I could access, the insurance records, the banking history I had legitimate access to from when I had helped my parents refinance years earlier, the public creditor filings for my brother's restaurant closure. I built a complete picture, dated, sourced, and annotated the way I annotate everything. Then I requested a meeting with a colleague who specializes in civil financial disputes and walked her through it. She read my timeline without any expression at all, which is how I know she took it seriously. She said, "Conversion of insurance proceeds held in trust for a named beneficiary is a civil claim. Depending on what changed on the beneficiary designation and when, it may be more than that." The word "more" sat in her office like the word "criminal" had sat in Grace's attorney's office, and neither of us asked it to leave. I called my mother on a Thursday morning from my desk because I wanted the professional version of myself present for the conversation. I told her I had questions about the insurance policy. There was a pause identical to the one the claims representative had given me 4 years ago, and I understood, hearing it this time, exactly what a pause like that means. She moved through stages the way my mother always moves through things. First, the gentle redirect, "It was so long ago, Elena, why are we reopening this?" Then the reframe, "It was a family decision. Your father's money was always for the whole family." And then, when those didn't land, the version she has used my whole life to close conversations. "Your father would have wanted us to stay together, Elena. He would not have wanted lawyers." I had heard that sentence, in some form, at every difficult moment in my family's history. When Marcus needed the loan co-signed. When the restaurant money came from my parents' savings, and I had suggested they shouldn't. When my father's funeral arrangements were made without asking me. "Your father would have wanted us to stay together." As if his wishes were a property my mother managed on his behalf and distributed selectively. I said I would be in touch, and I hung up, and I sat for a moment with a specific quiet that comes when you have been using a phrase your whole life and have just heard, for the first time, that it was never yours. My mother called Marcus within the hour. I know this because Marcus called me within 2 hours, his voice doing the careful thing it does when he has been briefed and is trying to seem like he arrived at the conversation on his own. He wanted to get coffee. I said yes, because I wanted to know what he knew, and because whatever happened next, I didn't want to do it to someone who had been kept in the dark. We sat in a corner booth and he told me what he knew, and to his credit, he told me all of it. He had known, after the fact, that the restaurant debts had been paid. He had assumed it was from savings, that it was a gift from their parents, that it was the kind of thing families do and don't discuss directly. When I showed him the timeline, he went very still. When I showed him the insurance claim number and the date and the payment amount, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I had not expected and that I've thought about many times since. He said, "She told me you were fine, that you didn't need it, that you'd be upset if we made a big thing out of money." He looked at the table, and I believed her because I needed to. He said it the way honest people admit things, quickly, without flinching. I needed to believe she had a way to fix it that wasn't going to cost you something, and I chose not to ask what the fix was. He raised his eyes. "That's on me too, Elena, not just her. It's harder to stay completely angry at someone who refuses to let you." I noted that. I didn't let it change anything, but I noted it. Sophia called me 3 times that week because she does that. Because she has at 6 somehow decided that her father's older sister is the person to call when she has found an interesting rock or drawn a particularly good horse. On the 3rd call, I looked at my father's glasses sitting on my kitchen counter and thought about the fact that everything I was about to do was going to ripple outward to a 6-year-old who collected rocks and drew horses and had no part in any of it. Then I thought about my father putting on those glasses whenever something needed to be seen clearly, and I made my decision. My mother suggested a family dinner. She used the word resolve, as in, we should sit down and resolve this as a family, and I recognized the shape of it immediately. The table set like a peace summit, the home ground, the family gravity that has always pulled me back to my chair. I said I would come. I heard the specific quality of her relief on the phone, and I let her have it because it was the last thing she'd get for free. She had prepared a document. I want to tell you this part carefully because it is the part that tells you everything about how well she knew me and had always known me. The document was 1 page, typed, and it said that I acknowledged the insurance proceeds had been used for family purposes during a period of financial hardship and that I had no claims against any family member regarding the distribution. She had it ready on the table when I arrived, under a coffee cup, the way you leave something when you want it to seem like it came up naturally rather than being the entire point. My father's glasses were in my coat pocket. I had started carrying them. I let my mother explain, which she did with the fluency of a woman who has rehearsed. The family had been in crisis. Marcus's situation had been desperate. She had made a decision under pressure, the kind of decision you don't have the luxury of deliberating when a family is in trouble. My father, she said, would have understood. She had meant to tell me. The moment had never been right. And now we could simply put it behind us if I would just, and she slid the document across the table. I didn't touch it. I put my hands flat on the table the way I do before a deposition, and I heard my own voice come out level and without any extra weight in it, because the extra weight belongs to the evidence and not to the person presenting it. I said, "Mom, the claim was filed 14 weeks after Dad died. The beneficiary designation had been changed. I have the date it was changed and the form number and the signature on file." Her face did 3 things in 5 seconds. I have the payment record, the date it cleared, and the creditor filings from Marcus's restaurant that show the timing. I have Dad's letter to Rosa. And I have a 2-hour consultation with a civil litigator whose assessment I'm happy to share with you. She opened her mouth. The document on the table doesn't change any of that. The record is already the record. You can't unsign a bank wire. The room went the particular silent that happens when someone's strategy encounters the thing it was designed to prevent and finds it already done. My mother went through her stages. Disbelief first, then revision, then something I wasn't prepared for, which is always the sign of a true thing arriving. Her voice dropped out of its managed register into something older and more scraped. She said she had watched my father work himself to a heart attack for 40 years, and she had never once asked anyone for help. Not once. And when her son was drowning in debt, she had made the only decision available to her, and nobody had been there to tell her if it was right or wrong. She said she had spent her whole life doing what needed to be done, and never being asked how she was managing it. She looked at me. "You're exactly like me, and I needed you not to need it. If you needed it, then what did that make everything I gave up?" I sat with that. The truest things are the ones that explain everything and excuse nothing. Those 2 facts had to sit in the same chair, and I let them. Then I said the thing I had come to say, which was not the thing she was expecting. "I don't want the money put back into my account," I said. "I want it put into a documented education fund for Sophia, managed by a trustee neither of us controls. Contribution from you and from Marcus, proportionate, over 4 years. Formal, legal, her name on it, not ours." My mother stared at me. Marcus, who had been silent, looked up. "The money Dad set aside was so that someone in this family would have a foundation they didn't have to ask for. Sophia didn't get a vote in any of this either. So that's where it goes." I looked at Marcus. "You co-sign the fund. You tell her when she's old enough what it's from and why." He nodded before I finished the sentence. It was the fastest decision I had ever seen him make. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, almost to herself, "He would have liked that." I said, "I know. That's why I chose it." She didn't sign the document on the table. Neither did I. We both knew there was no version of that document that made sense anymore. The fund was established 2 months later, documented, trusteed, Sophia's name at the top. Marcus made his first contribution before the paperwork was even fully processed, which told me something about the man he was trying to become. My mother made hers a week later with a check and no note, which told me something about the woman she had always been and the distance between who she was and who she wanted to be. My mother and I don't talk the way we used to. I want to be honest about that. Some conversations change the shape of a room permanently, and you learn to live in the new shape or you don't. We have coffee sometimes. We discuss Sophia. We discuss things that require discussing. What we don't do anymore is perform a version of closeness that costs one person the truth. That is not nothing. It is, in fact, significantly more than what we had before, even though it's less of what I used to think we had. Marcus and I have dinner once a month. He asks questions now, which he didn't used to, and he listens to the answers, which he really didn't used to. He is, slowly and imperfectly, and at 33, learning what it costs to know something and let yourself not know it. I think he'll get there. I'm not managing the timeline. Aunt Rosa gave me the glasses. Properly this time. She called me one Sunday and said they'd been on her nightstand long enough and they belonged with me. I drove down and she put them in my hands at her front door and said, "He picked you right." I wasn't sure if she meant the glasses or the letter or the fund or all of it. I said thank you and she hugged me the extra second again, the way she had the first time, and I filed it where I file the things that matter. They're on my kitchen counter now, next to my coffee cup, the same way they were on his when he died. I put them on sometimes when something needs to be seen clearly, which is, I've come to understand, the only reason glasses exist. My father left me $240,000. I used it to build something that will outlast the argument it came from. That was always the point of it, I think. That's what he was trying to say in writing when he didn't know how to say it in person. You've always been the one who carries everything. Here is something that carries you. I read it like instructions. If you have ever been the one in your family who handles things, who covers things, who has been so reliably fine that nobody ever thought to ask, tell me in the comments what it costs. Because I read every one, and some things need to be said out loud before they can be put down. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who finally aimed the attention they give everyone else at themselves. You've earned the ones that are coming.